How did it just disappear?
The boy! That thing he had, the pyramid. I know that this sounds crazy, but he somehow stopped time with it.
The best way to not have your subjects realize they're in a simulation is to date the simulation before computers. Wait, spoilers. Yeah, you knew this was a big list of spoilers, you're a smart cookie. The time-bending minds behind the series Dark have taken to mind-bending with a series that's one part Ghost Ship and one part Matrix, and all parts mystery and human drama. How deep does this rabbit hole go? The creators of 1899 already have a reputation for mind-bending stories with their mind-bending time travel series Dark. In their second outing, some favorite elements have started to emerge. The pervasive triangle that appears throughout the series reflects the triquetra from Dark. While Dark revolves around the mysterious time machine, the computer masquerading as a faulty steam pressure monitor drives the action of 1899. 1899 uses Greek mythology names in the same way that Dark uses biblical-leaning names like Ava and Adam. Dark's cult leader shadows the pretend priest of 1899. The black goo of Dark gives way to black crystalline objects. Dark starts with a missing kid. 1899 starts by finding a kid that it turns out someone is looking for. And of course the themes of perception and reality. The creators of 1899, as well as Dark, sure do love their symbols. For 1899, the reoccurring symbol is an upside-down triangle with a line through it. So you don't forget the importance of it, the triangle appears all over the place. It's the symbol, supposedly, of the company that bought the Kerberos and the Prometheus. Eventually, the ship starts receiving messages that are just triangles, that the first mate uses to enter a code on the ship. The carpet on the ship has a pattern that includes the triangles. Clemente is practically covered in the symbol, both with her earring as well as her hairpin. When you take a triangle into 3 dimensions, naturally you get a pyramid. Aside from being a fairly sound structure that has survived centuries, pyramids have become a go-to symbol for mystery and hidden motives. Elliot carries around a pyramid that turns out to be a conduit for escaping this reality, much like ancient Egyptians used them to transfer from this world to the afterlife. Henry is posed near a pyramid, as well as he searches for the boy in his own way out of his infinite loop. Perhaps the easiest go-to when considering the prominence of the triangle, in a story that appears to be about a ship mysteriously lost at sea, is the notorious Bermuda Triangle, storied to be part of the Atlantic route to the Americas that is responsible for missing ships and aircrafts. In this case, the mystery is a bit more localized. It turns out that the triangle had been telling us things weren't what they seemed the entire time. Greek philosopher Aristotle used different variations of the triangle to demonstrate the different elements. An upside-down triangle represents water, while an upside-down triangle with a line through it is the symbol for Earth. Whether it's there to be a reminder of the grounded or real world, or of the home that the actual Prometheus had left, with its passengers in crew, is still a bit up in the air, since the one consistent aspect of the show is that perception cannot be trusted. When Daniel alters the code of the simulation so that Mora's shots don't reset her, but instead send her back to her and Daniel's first simulation, he also reveals that he's reconfigured the exit and the key. The key is her wedding ring, and the portal is now a Piraminx. The Piraminx fits with the child's room setting, as well as the reoccurring theme of pyramids and triangles. The Piraminx is a pyramid-shaped version of the Rubik's Cube, made up of several smaller pyramids that can be turned. Like the Rubik's Cube, the goal is to turn it until all the colors are universal on all the sides. A pyramid as a puzzle is the perfect device to leave the puzzling simulation. By the time the Piraminx shows up, it's clear it's not 1899. But there are some other hints that time isn't what it seems early on in the show. When Umair G tries to console a concerned Ling Yi, they share a hopeful saying, "Things will get better in the end, and if they don't, it's not the end." Not only does this fit well, with the eventual realization that this simulation lasts 8 days, and then it repeats as each time the passengers make the same mistakes. It also is ahead of its time. The phrase entered pop culture when it was first used by John Lennon almost a century after 1899. The phrase first appeared in print in Portuguese from an author, Fernando Sabino, presumably from an indigenous saying. Rather than the two on the run characters being familiar with South American native sayings, they really are just John Lennon fans. People are quoting anachronistic sayings, of course, because it's all a Matrix-style simulation, but with 100% less leather and wirework martial art fights. The languages and techniques built to tell computers what to do have evolved over the lifespan of computers. But what has never changed is that computer operates by having a series of, quote, switches being either on or off, represented by either a 1 for on or a 0 for off. This, of course, is known as binary, and binary appears throughout as well. Mara's cabin is 1011, binary for 11. Why isn't 11 binary for 11? Well, binary is expressed in groups of 4. The first mate also sends a binary code with the up and down triangle buttons. Binary only scratches the surface when it comes to reprogramming terms and concepts weaved throughout the show. Elliot and Daniel access parts of the simulation via an actual bug. Any glitch in the coding that makes the program behave contrary to the intended purpose is referred to as a bug. Well, as you'll sometimes hear, it's not a bug, it's a feature. In this case, a feature for the singletons to manipulate the program. Keys give access to the program just like the show. Daniel releases a virus that manifests as junk code. Dark crystals that infect whatever touches them. There is talk of the creator or developer, the person who creates the code. Maybe the best connection, though, is the real name of the family at the center of the simulation, the singletons. In computers, there's the singleton pattern. This is, using a lot of terms I don't fully understand, that a program is restricted to one particular instance, like a ship lost at sea, and becomes dependent on the singleton pattern, which is why Daniel has to break it to break Mara free. While we're on the subject of computer terms, there happens to be one painted on the side of the ship. Kerberos is a networking protocol that allows nodes to authenticate each other over an insecure network. It also happens to be the three-headed dog meant to keep the dead in the underworld in Greek mythology. Greek mythology and philosophy play a big role in this series. The mysterious ship and eventual spaceship named the Prometheus, which of course is the first ship to encounter the xenomorphs and the Oh, no, wait, different sci-fi story. In mythology, Prometheus was meant to look over the people for the gods, but went and gave them fire, and by extension, control over their domain. For his efforts, he's doomed to be pecked at by vultures for eternity. Mary Shelley subtitled her own story of people taking control of their world by recreating life by adding the modern Prometheus to her novel Frankenstein. It's not only the Greeks that get into symbolism. Naturally, the pyramids allude to Egyptian history and mythology, but it doesn't stop there. Daniel, Elliot, and eventually Mara are able to manipulate the program via a green beetle. We eventually find out that the bug is based on Alfred, a bug that the real-world Elliot found and became an object lesson from his mom on not trapping the things you love. Even if you don't get to watch them grow, you know that they're out there just doing that. Elliot seems to have taken his lesson to heart as he becomes the driving element to free the passengers who are trapped by his own mom's simulation that seems at least in part created to capture at least a version of Elliot. Elliot doesn't show up on the spaceship, and there does seem to be some indication that the simulations were created to preserve Elliot, who may not have made it for the trip through space. In Egyptian mythology, a green beetle symbolizes an awakening. Fitting then that it's used to awaken Mara. While Henry Singleton doesn't sound particularly Irish, Mara and her brother Ciaran both have very Irish names fitting with the European immigrants on the turn-of-the-century immigrant ship. The name Ciaran means dark little one, which is fitting for the unseen man, behind the woman, behind the curtain. There are a lot of layers is what I'm saying. But there's perhaps another Greek allusion in the name Ciaran, as it sounds rather close to Charon, the boatman whose job it is to shuffle souls across the river Styx into the afterlife. This brings the picture full circle. The Prometheus has been gutted as it contained the secrets to the simulation, the reason the crew is instructed to sink the ship upon finding it. The Kerberos keeps the passengers in the other life simulation. Ciaran, who's now in control of Mara's simulation, appears to be responsible for moving all the people into the other world simulation. Of course, Jefferson Airplane's White Rabbit serves as the theme for the show, in this case as a moody cover by Elliot Sumner. White Rabbit has become the go-to piece of music, for reality isn't what it seems, making it ideal for a show where the very nature of reality is at its core. Going down the rabbit hole, or through the looking glass, is only the beginning, however. After the first episode, each following episode ends with its own musical symbolism. Episode 2, The Boy, ends with Deep Purple's Child in Time. Aside from the obvious connection to Elliot, and the fact that 1899 does not in fact take place in 1899, the band has said that the song is about growing up, learning the differences between good and bad, and that we eventually all die, with the baggage of our deeds in life. Naturally, this parallels with the baggage of each of the passengers, as well as the philosophical discussions revolving around good or bad. Episode 3, The Fog, ends with The Killing Moon by Echo and the Bunnymen, another song revolving around the discussion of human nature, notably between the concepts of fate versus free will, a philosophical theme for the show. Episode 4, The Fight, ends with Don't Fear the Reaper. Pretty straightforward. This song is a go-to for inevitable death. In this case, it's the casual way Elliot accepts being tossed overboard. Turns out because he knew of a respawn hack. Episode 5, The Calling, features Black Sabbath's The Wizard. The Wizard is about, well, Gandalf. Rockers of the 60s and 70s were really into Lord of the Rings. It's a whole thing. But it's also an episode where we're introduced to the man behind the curtain, so to speak. Episode 6, The Pyramid, features the other anthem for Things Aren't What They Seem, and the characters are trapped. Jimi Hendrix's cover of Bob Dylan's All Around the Watchtower. The interesting element here is a quirk of the lyric. The lyric end at the beginning of the story, putting the song in kind of an infinite loop, like the people aboard the Kerberos. Episode 7, The Storm, ends with Cat Stevens' The Wind. Most notably here is the final lyric. I've swam upon the devil's lake, but never, 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 I'll never make the same mistake again. No, never, never, never. That's in stark contrast to Henry Singleton's assessment that the passengers were doomed to make the same mistake every cycle. Episode 8's tune speaks for itself, as Mara realizes she's on a spaceship in 2099 to the tune of David Bowie's Starman. Since the symbolism of green beetles might not be the most obvious symbol of awakening, this symbol about a woman who needs to wake up from the illusion of her own life. So the show goes for more of a direct and easy to read symbol by having a character linger on a copy of The Awakening by Kate Chopin. This favorite assignment for intro literature classes just so happened to be published in 1899. The name and publishing dates aren't the only comparison, but they are the strongest. The novel, for those who weren't assigned the book in class, follows Edna, who spends the novel bucking against her presumed role as wife and mother in turn-of-the-century New Orleans. Even though her husband essentially gives her every freedom she asks for, the expectations of society eventually win out. Spoilers for a book over 100 years old and assigned in English 1A classes across the land, it ends with her watching a seagull break its wing mid-flight and falling into the ocean. Presumably it was struck by the metaphorical hammer. Like the passengers when they hear the chime, Edna gets up and walks herself into the sea. The Greek and Egyptian afterlife myths aren't the only nods to, well, the afterlife. Towards the end of Season 1, we start to see that people, and eventually even the whole Kerberos ship, pass through one simulation to another, and eventually from the simulation to what, for the moment, we'll decide is actual reality, but of course anything goes. The passage between simulations is a layered portal that bears more than a passing resemblance to the etchings of Dante's Paradiso. Paradiso finishes out Dante's Divine Comedy, where he's given a tour of hell, purgatory, and eventually heaven. The connection is less tenuous than it appears, as the layers of heaven presented in Paradiso happen to be marked by planets, moon, and the sun. Turns out the Paradiso portals were also trying to tell us that we were in space all along. One of the less direct interferences comes from biblical-based stories. 1899 takes place on a turn-of-a-century immigrant ship. Well, a simulation of a turn-of-the-century immigrant ship sailing from Europe to America. It's a German crewed ship that leaves port from London and carries passengers from all over Europe and even a pair from China. One of the roadblocks that arises again and again, as the ship's occupants explore the mystery of their existence, is the language barriers. 1899 is by design a European production, taking actors from all over the European Union. The creators intentionally offered it as a commentary on rising nationalism and the immigrant crisis, wanting to depict a Europe coming together to solve their problem. The barrier, of course, is the 8 characters left have a hard time talking to each other because of the language barrier. In Genesis, there is a story of people who try to build a tower to heaven, to know creation the way God would, similar to the way the passengers seek to understand their own virtual imprisonment. The story is meant to give origin of different languages and how humanity split along language lines. Like the Tower of Babel builders, the crew is handicapped by the different languages they speak. When Mara finally starts to unlock the wild, mysterious world she lives in, that is not just a ship that gets sidelined on the way to America, she ends up following Elliot down a tiled tunnel to another set of simulations. When she does that, her image is reflected several times around her, like the several different realities she occupies within the simulation. The initial mystery, aside from Mora being dragged into a chair and giving a shot, and then whispering "wake up" to everyone, is the letters key passengers and crew receive that include a newspaper clipping of the missing Prometheus. For the German premiere, to promote the film, they leaned into the newspaper device by printing up a new version of the newspaper. This time, instead of telling the story of a missing ship, it announced the arrival of their exciting new show. While this is a markedly pan-European production for both cast and crew, it is specifically a German show. Even more specifically, it's the most expensive German show ever produced. The heaping helping of the budget, of course, comes from Netflix. 10 million euros comes from the German Motion Picture Fund, the maximum allotment, and the first production to receive the full amount. Like many things in Europe, that's a product of World War II. After the war, Germany was flooded with Hollywood productions that it had missed out on in the mid-30s to mid-40s for reasons. Along with most of the studios had been associated with propaganda filmmaking being shut down. These high-budget movies that had already made their money in America and elsewhere meant that it became merely impossible to invest in domestic German films. In 1962, at the International Short Film Festival, 26 filmmakers created a manifesto for a, quote, new German feature film, in part arguing that there would have to be grants to fund German cinema in order to preserve German filmmaking after many of its innovators fled to the US ahead of World War II. The real question is if the second season would be 1899 Season 2, or if it will be called 2099 instead, or if Daniel and Elliot are still alive at all, or if 2099 is real reality. Actually, it turns out that there are quite a few real questions left hanging in the balance.